Hey guys, it's John. I'm really excited about the reaction I had to the first video, the climbing demonstration of what I'm calling the JRB climbing method. It's a doubled stationary rope system that I put together mostly for saddle hunters, but it's applicable to other applications as well in tree climbing. I went over a lot of the advantages in that video, but I wanted to just mention a couple more things that I didn't have a chance to say during the climb. And the first one really has to do with friction. So a lot of new climbers, and I realize my audience has a mixed bag of folks who've been climbing a while and folks that haven't tried it, and folks have tried it a little bit and thought it was difficult. And the key point, most people try climbing with a doubled rope technique, a moving rope system over a branch, where we get a lot of friction. And we can put a friction saver on that to try to reduce that. But the bottom line is they get intimidated by how difficult it is, because that friction, all of the friction caused by the branch, the rope moving through a crotch, you've got to overcome that in your climbing. And so this system has no friction because the rope does not move over the crotch, and that is a huge advantage. Doubled rope technique climbers who do that type of climbing, you'll see them doing that hip thrust where they put their feet on the tree and they thrust their hips to get a little momentum. That's actually not a difficult thing to do. It's instinctive if you've been climbing long enough. However, if you climb on a leaning tree and they're not all straight, where you can't get your feet on the tree, that's where it gets a little bit more difficult. And again, this system has no friction, and therefore it can climb a leaning tree as easy as a straight tree, possibly easier. And the other thing I wanted to mention, this method has a lot of similarity with single rope technique. But the nice thing about it is you don't have to worry about an anchor. By definition, a single rope technique, you have to anchor one side of the rope. And you've either got to anchor it at the base, a basal anchor where you're tying a knot, potentially in the dark, and that knot has to sustain your body weight, or you're doing a canopy anchor, which, let's just say, if you do the math about how much rope or line you need to get a canopy anchor in place and then retrieve it, it's a bit of work. Again, I want to avoid failure modes that you might have to encounter either getting in or getting out in the dark. Keep it fast, keep it safe, keep it effective. Okay, so and one last thing, with friction comes noise. If you've hunted a particular tree long enough and your rope is burning in a little bit into the bark, you can get a creaking noise along with that friction, and obviously noise doesn't go well with hunting. And so just wanted to get those in as well. I have experienced DRT and SRT, a lot of both, and I wouldn't be using this method if I didn't think it was better than both. Okay, so what I'm going to do now is go a little deeper on and let you see. I'm going to explain what knots I'm using, and then we'll do some more demonstration climbs in future videos, and I'll do more knot tying videos to give you details. But right now I'm going to give you the specs for should you want to try this thing. Now, if you do try this thing, you need to understand that I'm demonstrating my climbing method. Should you choose to entertain any of these techniques in your own climbing, I ask that you do so safely and accept responsibility for your own actions and decisions. Wear protective equipment and get a climbing partner or someone to watch and observe you. Do everything experimental with your feet a couple feet from the ground, right? We don't want to take any chances in the canopy. Okay, so what I'm going to do now is show you the system from top to bottom. It's up and over the tree crotch, much like you saw in the demonstration video. And the key to this whole thing are these two friction knots tied on both sides. They're pre-tied. And the name of this friction hitch, it looks like a distal, it's similar to distal, but it's called a Michoacan. That's spelled M-I-C-H-O-A-C-A-N, Michoacan. It is extremely similar to tie it. It's extremely similar to a Blake's hitch. However, it is tied, unlike a Blake's hitch, which is tied with a single line, this is loaded on both sides. This knot is typically tied with a eye-to-eye loop. If you don't know what that is, just think of it as a short rope. And that's what I've done here. I've tied it with a short rope, but it can't be tied with a prusik cord. It has to be tied with a rope or a line. So what I do to allow this to be a clip and climb method is I tie the Michoacans, both of them. There's about 14 inches of working space in this loop. And then what I do is I close them. And when you close a loop, a prusik loop, now I'm using a Zeppelin bend to close this loop. You might want to use a double fisherman's bend. I'll let you do research on the best bend that you want to use to close a prusik loop. But what you're seeing here is two Michoacans Again, Michoacan. You'll see that pronounced different ways, but I think I finally got it right. And I'm closing it with a Zeppelin bend with figure 8 stopper knots. This goes up nicely through a crotch as I pass my fingers over it to emulate a crotch. The fact that these stopper knots are offset makes it go through the crotch a lot easier. So this is your primary friction hitch. I've chosen it over things like Distal, over things like Bachman. I've tried every friction hitch in the book. I've even had some guys working on experimental hitches for me. This one is great, and the reason it's great, I've tested it in dry ropes, I've tested it with soaking wet ropes, is that it holds really well. It breaks really well. I can break my entire body weight, actually with one hand. You know, sometimes binds a little better than others, but I can always break that. If it's hard, I can definitely break one and then break the other. So it holds well, it breaks well, but when you're ascending, after I load it, I can move that really easily. It just slides really easily. It's just got all the right properties for the system. And like many friction hitches, should the exact combination of cord that you're using and rope that you're using bind too much, or more likely not bind enough, you could put another turn on this, like many friction hitches. Okay, so let's keep going. So as I move on down the system, I showed you in the demonstration video what I called my best friend system. And the best friend is really just a Klemheist knot tied around both ropes. That's a pretty easy friction hitch to learn how to tie. 3 turns. But what and so that clips onto your, you know, depends what you want to do for redundancy. You could have the diaper sling that I showed. What I generally do, because I do trust my saddle, I rarely wear the diaper sling so much as I have a redundant bridge. So what I have here is, you can see it, it's just simply a redundant bridge. And that just gives me a separate place to clip into. And that's typically where I'll tie in my best friend. So it's 2 completely separate points of attachment should there be any slippage or failure. But what I want to show you is an option for the best friend that doesn't require any tying of knots in the tree. So much like these 2 Michoacans were on the line when they went up and over the tree crotch, these 2 also were when I put this line on today. And so what you're seeing here are 2 pre-tied knots, and this is called the head-in hitch. It's a 4-turn head-in hitch, and I can use that as my best friend as well. Again, the advantage being that it was tied in advance. Didn't have to tie any knots in the tree. Clip this beaner, and start climbing. All right, now let me give you some specifications. The ratio, you know, you may have a thicker diameter climbing line than I do. I'm climbing on a 9.5 millimeter Sterling Super Static. You may have a thicker line. The ratio of the cord forming the Michoacan to the primary line, 75% is a good rule of thumb. It can be 60 to 80%, but I'm about a 73% or something with those ratios. Here I've gone a little smaller. I've gone down to a 5 millimeter line for this. Okay, so I'm just giving you you know, the correct diameters. You'll have to do the math on your system. If you're climbing with 11 millimeter rope, for example, you might want to go with 8. Okay, now the length specs. These were tied using 2 6-foot lengths of cord. These were tied using 2 5-foot lengths of cord. My redundant bridge was tied using 6-foot length of cord. My best friend in 8 millimeter was tied with 6 feet of cord. If you're buying rope, you generally want to go big in terms of, you know, order a couple extra feet. You can always cut things down after they're in place. Okay, and the last thing I really need to show you on this system is the foot loop. So for my foot loop, and I have 2, this is my single foot loop for 1 foot. This is a 6-foot length of 1 inch safety rated. Doesn't actually have to be safety rated because you're not using it to sustain your life. This is 6 feet, closed with a water knot. You can learn how to tie a water knot. And it goes around 2 D-style beaners without screw gates. No screw gates, just regular clippable. And I close them using a bull hitch. You'll see most folks close this using a regular girth hitch. I use a bull hitch, which is a little stronger, cinches a little tighter. Sometimes I'll even put a cable tie here to just keep it in place and not jingling around in my bag, so the beaners never get disoriented when I'm getting to a tree in the dark. So this forms a mechanism we call a Garter Hitch. So this is the Garter Hitch, 2 beaners locked in place. And here's how it goes on. I mean, you can watch this. It's very easy to attach, and this will hold my weight. So I'm not going to do a demonstration here, but what I'd like to show you is just an alternate variant, which is for 2 legs. So if you want both feet engaged, I've got another one here, 2 D-style beaners. Instead of 6 feet of webbing, I went with 10 feet of webbing, longer tails, and I am, again, a water knot, a girth hitch, and I create the 2 loops here at the bottom. I create them using a double alpine butterfly. Now, I know I'm throwing a lot of knots at you, but they're all out there on the web should you want to learn how to tie them. I know it seems like a lot, and it is, but these knots, again, can all be tied in advance, and your system is set and ready to go. You never need to know them at the tree. And as I close, I just want to make sure that you understand when you're buying equipment, you always need to get stuff that's extra strong. As an absolute minimum, the braking strength of any component you buy in your system, the rated braking strength should be 10 times the working load as an absolute minimum. Arborists go with more like a 20 times ratio. If you're not familiar with the units of kilonewtons, which most things are rated in, you can think of a kilonewton as 225 pounds, and you can roughly approximate that to someone's body weight. So, you know, I'm less than 200 pounds, but a 24 kilonewton beaner, oh, that's more than 20 times my body weight. I'm good. And again, with the length specs, go big. All right, so that's the gist of it. Thank you very much. Keep those comments coming. Please spread this information with your friends. I'm looking forward to sharing this with quite an audience. Thanks.